The cafeteria fell silent when Marcus Redstone sat down beside me, his tray bearing an identical meal to mine. Not similar, identical. Down to the precise arrangement of wilted lettuce leaves, the exact same brown spots on the apple, the identical crack running through the plastic container holding what I had convinced myself was homemade soup, but now recognized as something else entirely. The laughter that had echoed moments before died in throats suddenly gone dry. 23 pairs of eyes locked onto our matching trays, and in that crystalline moment of collective realization, I understood that my carefully constructed world was about to collapse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it truly began, 3 months earlier, when I first noticed the pattern hidden in plain sight. Every morning at exactly 7:43 a.m., I entered the Pinnacle Solutions building through the east entrance, badged in at security, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. My cubicle, 3C47, sat in the northeast corner of the open workspace, positioned perfectly to observe the daily rhythms of my colleagues while remaining largely invisible myself. For 6 years, I had processed insurance claims with methodical precision that earned me 3 Employee of the Month certificates and exactly 0 meaningful relationships. My coworkers knew me as Jake Sanderson, the quiet guy who brought strange lunches and never attended happy hours. They weren't wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. The strange lunches had become something of a legend in our department. While others microwaved leftover pizza or assembled turkey sandwiches from the building's deli, I arrived each day with elaborate, homemade meals that seemed to spring from another era entirely. Moroccan taginess with preserved lemons, Vietnamese pho with star anise-scented broth, Ethiopian injera bread with Berber-spiced lentils. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing than my coworkers suspected. I couldn't cook. Every meal came from Sage's Kitchen, a small restaurant tucked into an alley 6 blocks from my apartment. Each morning, I would stop by and order whatever special Sage had prepared the night before, requesting it be packaged in plain containers that I could later claim as my own handiwork. Sage Morningstar, her real name, she insisted when I'd asked, was perhaps the most talented chef in all of Moab, though her restaurant consisted of only 4 tables and a takeout counter. She was roughly my age, with premature silver threading through her dark hair and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had found their calling early and never questioned it. Our morning routine had developed naturally over the past year. I would arrive at 6:30 a.m. She would already be chopping vegetables or stirring sauces, and she would pack whatever had inspired her the previous evening. We rarely spoke beyond the exchange of money and gratitude, but there was something comforting about this daily ritual, this small deception that made my office life bearable. The problems began on a Tuesday in March, when Bryce Canyon, yes, that was actually his name, though he went by Canyon, decided my lunch was fair game for public ridicule. I had just settled into my usual spot at the cafeteria's corner table, unwrapping what appeared to be a complex grain bowl with roasted vegetables and some kind of tahini-based sauce, when Canyon's voice carried across the room. His assessment was crude and dismissive, comparing my meal to various unappetizing substances, while his immediate circle provided encouraging laughter. The mockery spread like ripples across water. Soon, half the cafeteria was craning their necks to get a look at my lunch, offering their own commentary on what they perceived as another example of Jake's culinary eccentricities. I continued eating, mechanically chewing each bite while heat crept up my neck. This wasn't the first time my meals had drawn attention, but something about Canyon's tone, the eager way others joined in, felt different. Sharper, more personal. River McKenzie, the department's social coordinator, slid into the seat across from me. River was one of those people who managed to be simultaneously popular and kind, a rare combination that made her mockery somehow worse than Canyon's crude jokes. Her suggestion about meal prep services was delivered with the kind of benevolent condescension that was somehow more insulting than outright mockery. The implication was clear. My elaborate lunches were either too time-consuming for a normal person to prepare or so unusual that they couldn't possibly be enjoyable. Either way, I was being gently corrected, nudged toward conformity. I finished my meal in silence, disposed of the container, and returned to my desk. But something had shifted that day. The comfortable rhythm of my deception felt suddenly fragile, exposed. For the first time in months, I found myself questioning why I continued this elaborate charade. That evening, I stood in Sage's kitchen longer than usual, watching her hands as she portioned out the next day's special, some kind of Middle Eastern stew with pomegranate molasses and fresh herbs. Her observation about food being personal, about mockery revealing more about the mockers than their targets, stuck with me through the evening. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the moment passed as other customers entered, and I left with my usual sense of disconnection, carrying tomorrow's deception home in a brown paper bag. The next day, Canyon's attention had moved on to other targets, but the damage was done. I found myself hyper-aware of every glance toward my lunch, every whispered comment that might or might not be directed at me. The joy I had taken in Sage's creations began to sour, replaced by self-consciousness and a growing resentment toward my coworkers' narrow definitions of normal. It was during this period of heightened sensitivity that I first noticed Marcus Redstone's eating habits. Redstone was Pinnacle Solutions CEO, a figure more legend than man in our day-to-day operations. He occupied the building's top floor, made occasional appearances at company-wide meetings, and was generally regarded as a brilliant but distant leader who had built the company from nothing into a regional powerhouse. What I noticed, during one of my increasingly frequent surveys of the cafeteria, was that Redstone ate lunch there exactly twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and always sat alone at a small table near the windows. More interesting still, his meals appeared to be homemade, elaborate affairs that he consumed with the same methodical attention I brought to my own lunches. This observation might have remained merely curious if not for what happened the following Tuesday. I had just unwrapped another of Sage's creations, a complex curry with what appeared to be 7 different vegetables and a flatbread I couldn't identify, when I glanced up to see Redstone entering the cafeteria. He carried his usual brown bag, moved to his usual table, and began unpacking his lunch with familiar precision. The curry was identical to mine. Not similar, identical. Same vegetables, same sauce, same mysterious flatbread, even packaged in the same type of container. I stared for a long moment, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I was seeing. The logical explanations were obvious but felt inadequate. Coincidence. Similar grocery stores. Shared taste in ethnic cuisines. But as I watched Redstone eat, noting the way he savored each bite with what appeared to be genuine appreciation rather than the mechanical consumption that characterized most cafeteria dining, I felt the first stirring of something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, perhaps. Or unease. I finished my meal quickly and returned to my desk, but the image of those 2 identical plates lingered. That evening, I found myself paying closer attention to Sage as she prepared my order, looking for clues about her other customers, her other morning routines. Her comment about spring bringing out people's appetite for complexity felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. When she mentioned that most customers weren't actually eating the food themselves, the observation hit like ice water. I managed some kind of neutral response and left quickly, but her words followed me home, echoing in the spaces between my thoughts. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth, and I made a point of arriving at the cafeteria early, positioning myself where I could observe Redstone's lunch without appearing to stare. He appeared at his usual time, carrying his usual brown bag, but something in his demeanor seemed different. More purposeful, perhaps, or more aware. He unpacked his meal, some kind of Vietnamese soup with fresh herbs and rice noodles, and I felt my stomach drop. In front of me sat an identical bowl, down to the precise arrangement of garnishes floating on the surface. This time, I couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. 2 identical meals might be explained away, but 3 suggested a pattern that made my carefully constructed world feel suddenly unstable. I ate slowly, watching Redstone from the corner of my eye, looking for signs that he was aware of our matching meals. But he seemed absorbed in his food, occasionally checking his phone but otherwise paying no attention to the rest of the cafeteria. It was only as I was preparing to leave that our eyes met across the room. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in that brief moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Recognition. Not surprise, not curiosity, but recognition. As if he had been waiting for me to notice. I left the cafeteria quickly, my mind racing through possibilities that seemed increasingly absurd but refused to be dismissed. That weekend, I found myself walking past Sage's kitchen at odd hours, peering through the windows, looking for evidence of other morning customers who might explain the identical meals. The restaurant appeared closed except during normal business hours, and I never saw anyone else entering or leaving during my morning visits. Sage worked alone, as far as I could tell, preparing orders for a customer base that seemed to consist primarily of office workers grabbing breakfast or early lunch. Monday arrived with gray skies and the weight of unanswered questions. I approached Sage's counter with more directness than usual, asking about other regular customers who might order similar elaborate meals. Her response was evasive, asking why I wanted to know. When I explained about someone at work eating identical meals, she offered the obvious explanation about shared shopping locations. But when I revealed that I didn't shop, that she made everything I ate, her simple acknowledgement that she already knew this opened a void beneath my feet. The comfortable anonymity was gone, replaced by the awkward awareness of acknowledged deception. Her refusal to discuss other customers felt significant, though I couldn't articulate why. Tuesday's lunch was a disaster. Canyon and several others had formed an unofficial committee dedicated to guessing the ingredients in my latest creation. They huddled around my table, offering increasingly absurd theories about the preparation of what appeared to be a complex North African stew. Their mockery continued for several minutes, with each new theory more elaborate than the last. I sat in the center of it all, mechanically eating while they dissected my meal like specimens in a biology class. It was in the middle of this performance that Marcus Redstone entered the cafeteria. He moved to his usual table, unpacked his lunch with familiar precision, and began eating what was unmistakably the same North African stew I was consuming 3 tables away. The coincidence was so blatant, so impossible to ignore, that the conversation around my table gradually died as others noticed the identical meals. Canyon was the first to voice what everyone was thinking, his profanity cutting through the sudden silence. The cafeteria fell into the kind of profound quiet that precedes either laughter or violence. Every eye moved between Redstone's table and mine, processing the impossible symmetry of our meals. And then Redstone did something that froze the blood in my veins. He looked directly at me, smiled slightly, and raised his spoon in what could only be interpreted as a salute. The spell broke. Nervous laughter rippled through the cafeteria. People began returning to their own meals, and the crisis passed. But something fundamental had changed. The identical lunches were no longer my private mystery. They had become public knowledge, a curiosity that would undoubtedly spawn speculation and investigation. I finished eating as quickly as possible and fled to my desk, but the damage was done. For the rest of the day, coworkers stopped by my cubicle with knowing smiles and leading questions about my connection to the CEO. The word spread through the department with the speed of all good gossip, mutating and growing with each retelling. By evening, I had been credited with everything from secret meetings with Redstone to an elaborate scheme to curry favor with upper management. The truth, that I had no idea why our meals were identical, seemed less believable than the various conspiracy theories that had sprouted in its absence. Wednesday brought no relief from the attention my public lunch with Redstone had generated. If anything, the speculation had intensified overnight. I arrived at work to find my cubicle surrounded by co-workers eager to hear about my secret relationship with the CEO. The assumption that I was somehow complicit in the matching meals had hardened into accepted fact, despite my protests of ignorance. River cornered me near the coffee machine, her expression mixing admiration with suspicion. Her comment about consulting with Redstone on ethnic cuisines, delivered with obvious disbelief when I denied any connection, made it clear that my protestations of innocence were falling on deaf ears. The news that HR had been asking about me was particularly disturbing. I had always prided myself on maintaining a low profile at Pinnacle, completing my work competently, but without drawing attention to myself. The idea that I was now on HR's radar felt like a violation of the careful boundaries I had constructed around my professional life. I spent the morning distracted, making small errors in my claim processing that required backtracking and correction. Every phone call, every email, every interaction with a supervisor carried the potential for questions I couldn't answer about my supposed relationship with Marcus Redstone. Lunchtime arrived with all the anticipation of a public execution. I had considered skipping the cafeteria entirely, bringing a simple sandwich from home to break the pattern that had made me the center of unwanted attention. But something, curiosity, stubbornness, or perhaps a masochistic desire to see how deep this mystery went, drove me to maintain my routine. I unpacked Sage's latest creation, some kind of Korean-inspired bowl with fermented vegetables and what appeared to be house-made kimchi, and settled into my usual corner table. The cafeteria buzzed with anticipation, conversations dying as people waited to see if Redstone would appear with a matching meal. He didn't disappoint. At exactly 12:15 p.m., he entered carrying his brown bag, moved to his window table, and unpacked an identical Korean bowl. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps, whispers, and the kind of excited energy that accompanies the confirmation of a wild theory. But this time, instead of eating at his usual table, Redstone stood up, collected his meal, and walked directly toward me. The cafeteria fell silent. Not the gradual quiet of people noticing an oddity, but the instant, complete silence of a group collectively holding its breath. Redstone stopped beside my table, his tray in hand, and looked down at me with an expression I couldn't read. His request to join me was asked loudly enough for the entire cafeteria to hear, and I understood that my response would be equally public. There was no graceful way to refuse, no explanation I could offer that wouldn't sound either rude or suspicious. He sat down across from me, arranged his napkin with the same precision he brought to everything else, and began eating. For a moment, we consumed our identical meals in silence while every person in the cafeteria strained to overhear whatever conversation might follow. His comment about the kimchi being very authentic, followed by his question about where I had learned to ferment vegetables, was clearly a trap, though I couldn't see its shape yet. He obviously knew I hadn't made the food, just as Sage had known. But acknowledging my deception in such a public setting would humiliate me in front of my coworkers and potentially cost me my job. My response about trial and error felt weak, but it was the best I could manage under the circumstances. His observation about fermentation requiring patience, about most people lacking the discipline for it and wanting immediate gratification, carried implications beyond cooking techniques. When he mentioned enjoying our parallel lunches for some time, acknowledging the pattern without implying direct connection, I understood that this wasn't a casual conversation between coworkers, it was something else entirely. His statement about noticing everything that happened in his building, delivered with careful emphasis, sent a chill through me. This wasn't about shared lunch preferences or coincidental meal choices. This was about surveillance, observation, and purposes I couldn't yet understand. We finished our meals in relative silence, exchanging only small talk that felt choreographed for public consumption. But underneath the mundane conversation, I felt the presence of larger forces at work, currents I couldn't understand but could sense pulling me towards some inevitable conclusion. As Redstone prepared to leave, his question about whether I would be available at the same time Friday felt like both an invitation and a command. By asking it publicly, he was forcing me to either commit to continuing our parallel lunches or find a way to break the pattern without appearing to snub the CEO. His smile when I agreed seemed somehow both satisfied and predatory, suggesting that my response had been anticipated and desired. The moment he left, I was surrounded by coworkers desperate for details about our conversation, theories about what it meant, speculation about my sudden elevation to the CEO's attention. I deflected as best I could, claiming ignorance about Redstone's motivations while privately trying to process what had just happened. That evening, I returned to Sage's kitchen with questions I was no longer sure I wanted answered. The restaurant was busier than usual, filled with after-work crowd that typically avoided the alley location. I waited until the other customers had left before approaching the counter. Her response when I said we needed to talk was unsurprising, as if she had been expecting this conversation. When I confronted her about Redstone eating the same meals I ordered from her, her simple confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Her clarification that he placed his own orders rather than receiving copies of mine raised more questions than it answered. When I pressed about the impossibility of the timing and exact presentations, her response about nothing being impossible with the right information made my skin crawl. She moved to the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned the lock. The sound echoed in the small space with finality that suggested this conversation would change everything. Her explanation that some customers were more predictable than others, that some customers had help being predictable, opened a chasm beneath my understanding of my situation. When she revealed that my lunch orders had been logged, analyzed, and predicted with 97% accuracy for the past year, that Marcus Redstone received weekly reports detailing what I was likely to order, I felt the foundations of reality shifting beneath me. The manila folder she retrieved from a filing cabinet I had never noticed before, labeled with my name in neat block letters, contained my entire life reduced to data points and behavioral analysis. Her recitation of the file's contents, employment history, educational background, psychological profile, spending patterns, social connections, health records, family relationships, criminal background check, credit report, and 13 months of lunch preferences made me feel naked and exposed in ways I had never imagined possible. The executive summary she read aloud, describing my pattern isolation, limited social integration, and consistently deceptive behavior regarding food preparation, recommended continued observation to determine potential security risks or asset value. The revelation that I was being assessed as either a problem or a solution that Pinnacle needed to determine which category I belonged in transformed my understanding of my entire professional existence. When she explained that the matching lunches with Redstone were a test of my reaction to having my patterns exposed, my ability to maintain composure under scrutiny, and my response to direct confrontation from authority figures, I realized that my life had been an experiment for months without my knowledge. Her assessment that I had performed better than expected, that most people broke much earlier in the process, felt like praise for passing a test I hadn't known I was taking. The revelation that this was part of a corporate intelligence assessment that Pinnacle conducted on all employees displaying unusual behavioral patterns made me wonder how many of my coworkers were also subjects of covert investigation. Her prediction that Marcus Redstone would offer me a new position requiring exactly the skills I had been demonstrating, attention to detail, comfort with deception, ability to operate independently while maintaining a low profile, suggested that my recruitment had been the goal all along. The description of the position involving significant salary increases, security clearances, and permanent confidentiality requirements made it clear that accepting would fundamentally alter my relationship with both Pinnacle and my own identity. Her explanation of what would happen if I refused continued observation, permanent classification as a known but unutilized resource, meant that true anonymity was no longer possible regardless of my choice. When I asked how long she had been part of this surveillance operation, her admission that she had been providing specialized meal services to Pinnacle employees for 3 years made me realize that my daily routine had been orchestrated from the beginning. Her description of ensuring that certain meals were prepared exactly the same way and delivered to specific people at specific times revealed that even my small daily deception about cooking had been manipulated by forces beyond my understanding. Her refusal to discuss other employees being assessed, citing authorization restrictions, confirmed that this was part of a larger operation involving multiple targets and significant resources. Her final comment about making a choice that would determine the rest of my career at Pinnacle carried the weight of an ultimatum disguised as an opportunity. Walking home through familiar streets that felt suddenly foreign, I understood that the anonymity I had treasured was revealed as an illusion. Every routine activity, every personal choice, every private moment had been subject to observation and analysis by people who saw me as either an asset to be acquired or a threat to be managed. Thursday passed in a haze of paranoia and forced normalcy. Every interaction with coworkers felt potentially significant. Every task assigned by supervisors carried the possibility of being another test. The attention from my public lunch with Redstone had only intensified, with Canyon cornering me twice for details about my special relationship with the CEO and River making pointed comments about people who suddenly found themselves in interesting positions. Even employees from other departments began recognizing me, offering knowing smiles that suggested my newfound notoriety had spread throughout the building. The assumption that I was somehow complicit in the matching meals had evolved into accepted fact, despite my continued protest of ignorance. Friday arrived with unseasonable clouds and the weight of anticipated confrontation. I knew that whatever was going to happen would happen today. The pattern had been established, the test administered, and now it was time for results. I approached Sage's kitchen with trepidation, unsure if our conversation had changed the fundamental nature of our transaction. But she greeted me with the same professional courtesy she had always shown, packaging what appeared to be some kind of Mediterranean grain bowl with unusual herbs and preserved lemons. Her question about whether I wanted the same as always carried new weight, though we both understood it wasn't really the same anymore. It would never be the same again. The cafeteria buzzed with anticipation when I arrived. Word had spread that Friday was the day for the matching meals, and people had begun gathering earlier than usual to witness whatever performance Redstone and I would provide. I unpacked my lunch mechanically, barely registering the complexity of flavors that had once brought me genuine pleasure. The food had become a prop in a drama I didn't understand, serving purposes beyond nutrition or enjoyment. At exactly 12:15 p.m., Marcus Redstone entered the cafeteria. But instead of moving to his usual table, he walked directly to mine, his identical meal in hand. His request that I join him in his office when I finished eating was phrased politely, but everyone in the cafeteria understood it was not actually a request. This was the moment Sage had predicted, the inevitable conclusion of whatever process had been unfolding around me for the past year. He sat down across from me, and we consumed our identical meals in silence while the entire cafeteria pretended not to watch. The Mediterranean bowl was perfectly prepared, complex, balanced, satisfying, but I could barely taste it. My attention was focused on the man across from me, trying to read his intentions in the careful way he arranged his food, the precise movements of his hands, the occasional glances he directed at other diners. When we finished, he stood without ceremony, and I followed him out of the cafeteria, through corridors I had never seen, to executive elevators that required special key cards to operate. The other employees we passed stepped aside deferentially, and I realized that my association with Redstone was being publicly cemented with every step we took together. His office occupied a corner of the building's top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the entire city. The space was decorated with understated luxury, original art, handcrafted furniture, and technology so seamlessly integrated it was almost invisible. He poured coffee from what appeared to be an antique silver service, handing me a cup of real china rather than the disposable cups that dominated the rest of the building. His observation about my 6 years at Pinnacle, my solid performance without particular ambitions, my competent but passionless work processing insurance claims, felt like a performance review I hadn't requested. When he directly addressed my elaborate deception about lunch preparations, acknowledging what we both knew while forcing me to respond, I chose honesty over continued pretense. My admission that I had been ordering from Sage's kitchen for about a year because I wanted people to think I was more interesting than I am, and that this revealed my comfort with small deceptions when they served my purposes, seemed to satisfy him. His observation that my honesty was refreshing, even when partial, suggested that he understood I was still withholding information about my motivations and insecurities. When he pressed about why I needed to appear more interesting, what I was hoping to accomplish with this enhanced version of myself, his question cut deeper than I had expected. My response about wanting to be someone who could create something beautiful instead of just processing other people's disasters felt raw and revealing. His philosophical observation about insurance claims representing moments when people's carefully constructed lives fell apart, when assumptions about security and stability were revealed as illusions, seemed to carry significance beyond casual conversation. His assessment that I read claims carefully, looking for inconsistencies and catching small lies because I practiced deception myself, was accurate but uncomfortable. When he directly asked what I knew about corporate espionage, the question felt like a test I wasn't prepared for. My fumbling response about industrial secrets and competitive intelligence seemed inadequate. His explanation that corporate espionage required people comfortable with deception, skilled at pattern recognition, and able to operate independently while maintaining normal appearances made it clear where this conversation was heading. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was more disturbing than I had anticipated. When I suggested that he wanted me to spy on people, his correction about helping protect Pinnacle's interests while gathering intelligence about potential threats made the criminal nature of what he was proposing sound like patriotic duty. His enumeration of potential threats, employees selling information to competitors, contractors skimming funds, partners planning to break agreements, clients filing fraudulent claims, revealed the scope of what he suspected was happening within his own company. My background in claims processing, he explained, had given me excellent training in detecting deception. My comfort with maintaining false personas made me ideal for undercover work, and my general invisibility within the company meant I could observe people without drawing attention. When I asked what would happen if I refused, his response wasn't exactly a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. The opportunities that would be unavailable to me in the future, salary increases, promotions, access to more interesting work, stock options, executive development programs, represented the difference between advancement and stagnation. The deliberately compressed timeline, requiring me to start Monday without time for consideration or outside counsel, was designed to prevent overthinking or seeking advice that might complicate my decision. The position would involve reporting directly to him, with a cover story about special projects for the executive team, while my real job would be helping him understand what was really happening in his company. Monday morning brought the weight of fundamental change. Instead of taking the elevator to the 14th floor, I was directed to a small office on the 12th floor that I had never seen before. The space was functional but anonymous, perfect for work that wasn't supposed to be noticed. Darcy Stone, Pinnacle's Director of Internal Security, was waiting with files and orientation materials. Darcy was perhaps 50, with precise bearing that suggested military background and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. The cover story about conducting efficiency analyses for various departments would give me legitimate reasons to ask questions, request access to records, and spend time observing different work groups. My new badge displayed Special Projects Analyst instead of Claims Processor. The real job was more complex. Several situations required investigation, and Redstone believed my particular skills made me ideal for this work. The files contained surveillance photos of Pinnacle employees in various settings: the cafeteria, parking garage, outside the building. Darcy explained that they had reason to believe someone in accounting was providing financial information to competitors, someone in human resources was selling employee data to identity thieves, and someone in claims processing was helping clients file fraudulent insurance reports. When I asked if all this was happening simultaneously, her response that corporate espionage rarely occurred in isolation, that one person willing to betray their employer created opportunities for others with similar inclinations, suggested a coordinated conspiracy rather than isolated incidents. Additional files contained detailed information about suspected employees, their behavior patterns, financial situations, personal relationships, and potential motivations for corporate betrayal. The irregularities had been noticed about 18 months ago, small things at first that gradually revealed patterns of information appearing in competitor reports, identity theft cases involving Pinnacle employees, and insurance claims that were technically legitimate but statistically suspicious. They suspected someone was coordinating multiple streams of illegal activity, using Pinnacle as a base for organized crime. My role would be to identify the people involved, understand how their operation functioned, and help gather evidence for prosecution. This wasn't about firing employees. They were dealing with federal crimes requiring FBI involvement and federal prosecutors. I would be the inside observer who could testify about what I witnessed, provide documentation of criminal activity, and help law enforcement understand how the operation functioned. When I asked about the danger of discovery, Darcy's matter-of-fact response that I could be in significant physical danger made the abstract concept of undercover work suddenly concrete. People involved in organized crime tended to respond poorly to infiltration attempts. My acceptance of the position, she explained, had been assumed when I agreed to meet with Redstone. My presence that morning constituted acceptance, and they had already begun restructuring my old position and setting up my new identity within the company. The legal obligations that would persist regardless of my employment status, security clearances, access to classified information, knowledge of ongoing federal investigations, meant that certain information I learned could never be shared with anyone, ever, under penalty of federal prosecution. The confidentiality agreements and security protocols associated with this work would bind me permanently, regardless of how long I remained in the position. My potential reassignment to filing, data entry, or mailroom operations if I refused to cooperate represented the corporate equivalent of exile minimum wage work with no advancement opportunities. The assignment was expected to last until they had identified and prosecuted everyone involved in the criminal conspiracy, which could take months or possibly years. The encrypted communication device looked like an upgraded smartphone and would allow me to report observations, request guidance, and maintain contact with the investigation team, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, IRS investigators, and other specialists assigned to the case. My initial focus would be the accounting department, specifically observing Mesa Canyon, River McKinsey, and Aspen Moab to determine which ones were involved in selling financial information to competitors and how they were doing it. I would need to get closer to them, build relationships, earn their trust, and learn about their personal lives, financial situations, motivations, and opportunities for criminal activity. The efficiency analysis cover story would give me legitimate reasons to spend time in accounting, ask questions about workflows, and observe how different employees interacted with sensitive information. I was looking for unusual behavior patterns, unexplained wealth, secretive phone calls, unauthorized access to computer systems, meetings with people outside the company, anything that suggested sharing information inappropriately. My reporting through the encrypted device would be daily at minimum, more frequently if I observed anything suggesting immediate criminal activity. My first day as an undercover investigator began with walking through familiar corridors while carrying out a secret mission against people I had worked beside for years. The efficiency analysis cover story felt thin, but my coworkers accepted it with resigned indifference typical of corporate initiatives. Mesa Canyon's workspace offered good sight lines to most accounting cubicles while remaining relatively private. She was perhaps 45, with graying hair in a practical bun and precise handwriting suggesting decades of careful record-keeping. Her response to my efficiency analysis inquiry was mildly curious rather than suspicious. My explanation about understanding information flows between departments to reduce redundancy and streamline communication sounded plausible. Mesa walked me through her daily routine with methodical detail that suggested either complete innocence or carefully rehearsed deception. She processed vendor payments, reconciled bank statements, prepared monthly financial summaries, and coordinated with external auditors, all normal accounting functions that appeared entirely legitimate. Her genuine puzzlement when I asked about working with competitors' financial data, her lack of access to employee information beyond basic payroll functions, and her organized but not obsessively neat workspace suggested either innocence or exceptional skill at maintaining false appearances. After 30 minutes of questioning, Mesa Canyon appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a competent, honest accountant performing her job without drama or suspicious behavior. River McKinsey presented different challenges. As social coordinator, she moved freely throughout the building, interacted with employees from multiple departments, and had legitimate reasons to gather personal information about people's lives. Her enthusiasm about efficiency analysis could have been genuine interest or carefully performed friendliness. Her role organizing social activities gave her access to detailed personal information about employees, family situations, interests, workplace relationships, all documented in color-coded spreadsheets. Her casual description of collecting and recording personal information about coworkers by showing genuine interest and remembering what people told her was exactly the kind of behavior that could facilitate identity theft or other crimes involving personal data. When I asked about sharing information with people outside the company, her confusion seemed genuine. Though her admission that she sometimes mentioned dietary restrictions or allergies to catering vendors showed she did share personal details when she considered it appropriate. Her direct challenge when my questions became too personal, asking if there was something specific I was investigating, caught me off guard. Either River was genuinely innocent and detecting the suspicious nature of my questions, or she was sophisticated enough to deflect investigation with apparent confusion. Her statement about taking privacy seriously and never sharing personal information without legitimate business needs sounded sincere, but I had learned that sincerity was easy to fake. Aspen Moab worked in accounts receivable, processing payments from insurance companies and tracking outstanding claims. She was younger than Mesa and River, perhaps 30, with carefully curated appearance that suggested attention to personal presentation and possibly more disposable income than her salary would typically support. Her direct and slightly aggressive question about whether they were planning layoffs suggested either natural suspicion or specific reasons to be concerned about corporate scrutiny. Her detailed knowledge of the accounts receivable process came from genuine expertise. She tracked claim payments, identified processing delays, coordinated with legal teams on disputed claims, and maintained detailed records of payment patterns. Her access to claimant personal information, names, addresses, policy numbers, claim details, and admission that financial information like bank account numbers and social security numbers was in claim files she could access with legitimate business reasons made her a potential source for identity theft operations. When I asked directly if anyone had ever offered to pay her for information about insurance claims or claimants, the question transformed her entire demeanor. Her casual friendliness vanished, replaced by careful neutrality. Her immediate and definitive denial that she had committed crimes, followed by her defensive question about whether I was accusing her of criminal activity, suggested either genuine offense at the implication or guilt combined with deflection attempts. After completing initial interviews with all three suspects, I returned to my anonymous office to prepare my first report. The encrypted device connected to what appeared to be a federal law enforcement database with sophisticated reporting interfaces for behavioral observations, suspicious activities, potential evidence, and recommendations for further investigation. My preliminary conclusion was that all three women appeared to be competent employees performing their jobs without obvious signs of criminal activity. But I understood that real criminals would be skilled at maintaining normal appearances. The encrypted device buzzed with an incoming message, good initial work. Focus on Aspen Moab. Financial surveillance suggests unexplained income sources. The message disappeared after 30 seconds, leaving no trace. Over the following weeks, I developed a routine balancing cover story responsibilities with increasingly sophisticated surveillance of Aspen Moab. The financial intelligence about unexplained income had transformed her from one of 3 suspects into my primary target. Aspen's wardrobe rotated through designer clothes that seemed expensive for her salary. Her jewelry appeared to be real gold and silver rather than costume pieces. She drove a car that was only 2 years old and in pristine condition. Most tellingly, she frequently ate lunch at upscale restaurants rather than bringing food from home or eating in the cafeteria. I began timing my breaks to coincide with hers, observing her lunch companions and noting the restaurants she frequented. Most meals appeared to be business meetings with well-dressed individuals I didn't recognize, people who carried expensive briefcases, wore tailored suits, and spoke in low, intense conversations. The encrypted device provided regular updates about Aspen's bank records showing deposits exceeding her salary, credit report indicating luxury purchases beyond her means, and cell phone records showing frequent communication with numbers associated with corporate espionage operations. My breakthrough came when Aspen mentioned having computer problems. Her complaint about the claims database freezing when accessing older files gave me an opportunity to offer help. While working on her computer, I was able to install monitoring software that would track her activities and report through the encrypted device. The technical problem was minor, but the access allowed me to observe her workflow and note the databases she accessed regularly. The surveillance software revealed that she was accessing claim files far more frequently than her job required, often during non-working hours. More suspiciously, she was running searches on specific claimants and printing reports that weren't part of her normal workflow. When I offered to take her to lunch as thanks for letting me fix her computer, her suggestion of a quiet bistro 3 blocks away matched one of the restaurants where I had observed her meeting suspicious individuals. Friday's lunch provided my first real insight into Aspen's operation. The bistro was indeed quiet, with well-spaced tables allowing private conversation. Aspen arrived carrying a leather portfolio that she placed carefully beside her chair. Her distraction was obvious, frequently checking her phone and glancing toward the entrance as if expecting someone. Her anxiety became clear when 2 well-dressed men entered and took a table near the back. Aspen's entire demeanor changed when one of the men approached our table. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and confident bearing suggesting significant wealth and power. Sterling Arch's interruption of our lunch was polite, but carried authority that made it clear this wasn't really a request. Aspen's pale reaction suggested fear rather than mere social awkwardness. Instead of leaving with Sterling, Aspen remained seated, creating an awkward triangle around our small table. Sterling's casual inquiry about my work in claims processing felt loaded with implication, particularly his comment about being interested in meeting people who understood the insurance industry from the inside. His suggestion that we continue the conversation somewhere more private led us to the back table, where his companion Reed Zion was waiting. Reed carried himself with quiet intensity, suggesting either law enforcement or criminal background. Sterling's comment about teamwork being important in any organization carried obvious weight when he emphasized the word organization, making it clear we were no longer discussing pinnacle solutions. Aspen's explanation that Sterling and Reed represented clients interested in insurance industry data, specifically claims involving high-value settlements that might be vulnerable to challenge, used euphemistic language clearly meant to disguise criminal intent. Reed's elaboration that they were interested in claims information that could be disputed, delayed, or otherwise manipulated for financial gain made their criminal intent unmistakable, despite the careful indirection probably intended to provide plausible deniability. Their offer of extra income in exchange for information about certain insurance claims, described as data helping them understand market trends and settlement patterns, was criminal solicitation disguised as legitimate market research. Sterling's business card contained only a phone number with no other identifying information. His advice to think about their proposition but not think too long, because opportunities like this didn't come around often, carried implicit pressure despite the casual delivery. The meeting ended with handshakes and casual farewells, but I understood that I had just been recruited into a criminal conspiracy. The question was how to respond without compromising my cover or putting myself in immediate danger. Aspen and I walked back to the office in tense silence, both processing what had happened from our respective perspectives. Her apology about Sterling being intense was followed by her prepared script about him, representing investors interested in insurance industry trends who paid for information, helping them understand settlement calculations and claim dispute patterns. When I pointed out that I didn't shop for ingredients, that Sage made everything I ate, her simple acknowledgement that she already knew this confirmed that my deception had been transparent to multiple people for months. Her refusal to discuss other customers, citing customer confidentiality, felt significant though I couldn't articulate why. That evening, I prepared my most detailed report yet, documenting the recruitment meeting and criminal conspiracy I had uncovered. The encrypted device confirmed that Sterling Arch and Reed Zion were known to federal law enforcement as operators of sophisticated white-collar crime networks. More disturbing was learning that Aspen Moab was not just a corrupt employee selling information for personal gain. She was part of an organized criminal enterprise using Pinnacle as a base for multiple illegal operations. Monday morning brought new instructions through the encrypted device. Accept recruitment offer. Participate in criminal activities under law enforcement supervision. Gather evidence for federal prosecution. Reading these orders in my apartment's pre-dawn darkness, I felt the last vestiges of my old life falling away. I was being commanded to become a criminal to catch criminals, to risk prosecution myself in service of a larger investigation still largely hidden from me. Aspen approached my desk within an hour of my arrival, her manner suggesting carefully controlled nervousness. When she asked if I had thought about Sterling and Reed's discussion, my affirmative response brought obvious relief, mixed with what looked like sympathy. Her prediction that Sterling would want to meet privately that night, that these people didn't like to wait, emphasized the rapid decision-making criminal operations required to minimize exposure. The encrypted device buzzed with updates throughout the day. Surveillance teams in position. Recording equipment ready. Federal prosecutor briefed on tonight's meeting. Maintain cover at all costs. Sterling's call at 3:47 p.m. directed me to meet at the Red Rock Lounge's private dining room at 6:30. The upscale establishment in Moab's historic district catered to wealthy tourists and locals wanting to project sophistication. The private dining room's separate entrance allowed for discretion. Sterling and Reed were already seated with a third man I hadn't seen before. Canyon Rivers was introduced with casual menace, suggesting extensive experience with violence. The organizational chart Reed displayed showed multiple revenue streams: insurance fraud, identity theft, corporate espionage, money laundering, and euphemistically labeled settlement optimization. Each stream connected to specific companies, including Pinnacle Solutions, and was staffed by named individuals I was beginning to recognize as coworkers. The sophistication was staggering. This comprehensive business model generated millions of dollars annually and had taken 3 years to build relationships and establish revenue streams. Canyon's comment about being protective of their investment carried an unmistakable threat. My role would involve identifying high-value insurance claims vulnerable to challenge or manipulation. Sterling defined vulnerable claims as those involving wealthy individuals who might be embarrassed by public litigation, claims with complex coverage questions that could be disputed, or claims where claimants had legal or financial problems that could be exploited. The examples Reed showed of previous cases they had manipulated represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in diverted settlement money. They weren't just stealing information. They were using it to manipulate legal and financial systems for maximum profit. Canyon's explanation of legal challenges, settlement negotiations, and strategic pressure applications was describing extortion, fraud, and probably witness intimidation using euphemistic language. The compensation was 10% of recovered settlement amounts with a minimum $5,000 per case I identified. If they handled dozens of cases annually, I could potentially earn more from criminal activity than from my legitimate salary. The thick envelope Sterling slid across the table contained $5,000, my advance payment for researching the first case. Accepting it would constitute concrete evidence of my agreement to participate in their criminal conspiracy and provide law enforcement with direct evidence of criminal solicitation. The case details involved Preston Zion, Reed's brother, who had filed a major insurance claim following a house fire in an expensive neighborhood. Reed explained that Preston had filed a legitimate claim for fire damage, but they believed the insurance company was undervaluing his losses. They wanted me to research the company's position and identify weaknesses they could exploit. The personal connection made the situation more complex. I wasn't just being asked to participate in insurance fraud. I was being asked to help criminals defraud Reed's own family member. Canyon's quiet assurance that everyone had vulnerabilities, that my job was to find them and report them, emphasized the comprehensive intelligence gathering they expected. The meeting concluded with handshakes and instructions for future contact, but I understood that I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I was now an active participant in a criminal conspiracy, carrying evidence of that participation in the form of payment and fraudulent assignment. Driving home through familiar streets that felt suddenly foreign, I tried to process my transformation from mundane office worker to federal informant to active criminal. The envelope on my passenger seat represented both evidence for law enforcement and proof of my own culpability in serious federal crimes. The encrypted device buzzed with a message as I finished my report. Excellent work. Continue participating. Legal immunity guaranteed for cooperation. I spent the next 2 days researching Preston Zion's insurance claim while simultaneously gathering intelligence for the federal investigation. The case was complex, involving disputed damage assessments and coverage questions that could support either legitimate appeal or fraudulent manipulation. More disturbing was discovering that Preston appeared unaware of his brother's criminal activities. The fire damage was real, the insurance claim was legitimate, and his family was struggling financially while waiting for settlement. Reed was planning to defraud his own brother while presenting it as assistance with an unfair insurance company. I completed my report according to Sterling's specifications, documenting Preston's financial vulnerabilities and identifying potential pressure points for settlement negotiations. But I also flagged the information in my encrypted device reports, ensuring federal law enforcement would be prepared to intervene before actual fraud occurred. The handoff meeting Thursday evening at a downtown parking garage offered privacy and multiple exit routes. Sterling arrived alone, his manner suggesting increased confidence in my reliability. His satisfaction with my report was obvious as he reviewed the intelligence about Preston's situation. The strategic pressure they planned to apply to the insurance company would likely result in a significantly improved settlement offer within 2 weeks. The second envelope contained information about a different case and another $5,000 payment, an auto accident involving a local business owner with interesting financial arrangements. Each transaction deepened my involvement in their operation while providing additional evidence for federal prosecution. The contradiction was becoming the defining characteristic of my existence, simultaneously advancing criminal conspiracy and gathering evidence to destroy it. When I asked about the scope of their operation, Sterling's response was need-to-know basis, but he indicated relationships throughout the regional business community including insurance, banking, legal, real estate, and government. Corruption was surprisingly widespread when you knew where to look for it. His explanation that building their network had taken years to identify the right people, develop trust, and establish reliable revenue streams emphasized the sophisticated long-term planning involved. When I asked about wanting out, Sterling's expression became very serious. Once someone was part of this organization, they had access to information that could destroy many people's lives. That created certain obligations. The threat was delivered with the same casual tone he used for everything else, but the message was clear: leaving the organization was not an option that would be tolerated. Driving home with growing awareness that my situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, I understood that the federal investigation provided some protection. But I was also accumulating evidence of my own criminal activity that could be used against me if the operation went wrong. More troubling was realizing that I was beginning to understand the appeal of the criminal lifestyle Sterling offered. The money was substantial, the work was intellectually challenging, and the sense of operating outside normal social constraints was oddly liberating. The encrypted device message about a major breakthrough and additional criminal activity discovery, preparation for expanded operation, interrupted my troubling thoughts. Whatever came next, I understood that my journey into this hidden world was far from over. The expanded operation began with a dawn raid on my apartment by people I initially mistook for criminals but who turned out to be federal agents. 3 men in dark suits who knew my name, had keys to my building, and carried credentials that looked authentic but meant nothing to me in my state of confused terror. Agent Stone identified himself as FBI, but I recognized his name. Darcy Stone was my handler at Pinnacle, though this man was clearly someone different. Either there were multiple stones in the operation or one of them was not who they claimed to be. When I explained that I was already cooperating with the investigation, his response about confusion regarding the nature of my cooperation sent ice through my veins. The devastating revelation that I was under investigation for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering shattered my understanding of my situation. Agent Stone's statement that they had no record of any authorized undercover operation involving me, that there was no Darcy Stone in the FBI, no federal investigation of Pinnacle Solutions, and no legal immunity for my criminal activities meant that everything I believed about my work was wrong. The encrypted device, I learned, was provided by the criminal organization I had been working for. The reports were being read by Sterling Arch and his associates. The surveillance was conducted by private investigators hired to monitor my cooperation with their conspiracy. Not only had I been manipulated into participating in criminal activities, but I had been manipulated into documenting my own crimes while believing I was helping law enforcement. Marcus Redstone, far from being a legitimate CEO offering career advancement, had been under investigation for corporate fraud for 18 months. The position I accepted was designed to give me access to information needed for the criminal conspiracy. Sage Morningstar was a professional intelligence operative hired by Sterling Arch to establish a relationship with me and monitor my psychological state. The identical meals were designed to create a sense of connection and mystery that would make me more susceptible to recruitment. Even my morning routine and small deception about cooking had been manufactured by criminals studying my psychology and planning my recruitment. The criminal organization had identified me as a potential asset approximately 2 years earlier, studied my patterns and vulnerabilities, and constructed an elaborate recruitment scenario designed to make me believe I was working for law enforcement. The documents Agent Stone showed me detailed the organization's assessment of my personality, financial situation, social isolation, and susceptibility to appeals to authority and patriotism. They knew exactly what buttons to push to make me feel important and useful while convincing me that criminal activity was actually law enforcement cooperation. The psychological manipulation was so sophisticated that I felt sick understanding how completely I had been deceived. Agent Stone's offer that I cooperate with the actual federal investigation, continuing my association with the criminal organization while providing real intelligence to real law enforcement agents, was both a lifeline and a trap. The cooperation agreement included immunity for past criminal activity in exchange for testimony and continued undercover work. But refusing would leave me facing serious federal charges for crimes I had committed while believing I was serving law enforcement. The phone call to the FBI field office in Salt Lake City confirmed Agent Stone's legitimacy and the existence of the investigation, providing verification that this offer was genuine rather than another layer of deception. The assignment would last until they dismantled the entire criminal organization, probably 18 to 24 months. Round-the-clock surveillance, emergency communication protocols, and extraction procedures would provide safety measures if my cover was compromised. Agent Stone's final warning that this organization had killed people who threatened their operations, that I would be risking my life every day until they could bring them to justice, emphasized the stakes involved. The alternative was 20 to 30 years in federal prison for crimes I had already committed. That evening, Agent Mesa Redrock contacted me at Sage's Kitchen after closing. The restaurant had become an official law enforcement staging area, with Sage herself in federal custody as a cooperating witness whose cover had been compromised when the criminals began suspecting her of unreliability. The next assignment from Sterling would involve researching 3 new insurance claims: a restaurant fire suspected of being arson for insurance money, a car accident involving staged collisions with innocent drivers, and disability fraud involving fake injuries and corrupt medical professionals. Each case represented a different criminal scheme, and my intelligence gathering would be used to prevent crimes and gather evidence for prosecution. The organization involved at least 40 individuals across multiple states, including corrupt lawyers, doctors, insurance adjusters, police officers, and government officials. Marcus Redstone was the primary target. He had been using Pinnacle Solutions as a front for money laundering and corporate espionage for at least 3 years. The moral complexity was staggering. I was being asked to participate in planning crimes while trusting that federal agents would prevent those crimes from being completed. Major organized crime investigations typically took 18 to 36 months to complete, but given the scope of this operation, it could be longer. I would have to maintain this double life for the entire period unless the organization was dismantled sooner or my cover was compromised. The next morning brought new instructions from Sterling, exactly as Agent Redrock had predicted. 3 cases, each more complex and morally troubling than previous assignments. The restaurant fire involved a struggling family business that would be offered a solution through insurance fraud, then extorted for continuing payments once complicit. The car accident case involved staging collisions with wealthy drivers who would be blackmailed rather than face public litigation. The disability fraud recruited people with legitimate injuries to exaggerate conditions while corrupt medical professionals provided false documentation. Each scheme was sophisticated, carefully planned, and designed to generate maximum profit while minimizing legal exposure for organizers. The encrypted device provided updates throughout the day as I researched cases while documenting everything for the FBI. Restaurant owners contacted by FBI warned about fraud attempt. Medical fraud ring under surveillance. Evidence gathering in progress. Car accident victims identified. Protection being arranged. The federal response was swift and professional, but I wondered how long before the organization noticed their schemes being disrupted by unusually well-informed law enforcement intervention. That evening's meeting with Sterling to deliver research reports found him pleased with my work, but slightly distracted. His discussion of recent problems, schemes disrupted by law enforcement interference, claims denied that should have been approved, people becoming suspicious who should have been cooperative, indicated the organization was noticing FBI intervention. His suggestion that someone was providing information to law enforcement, his observation about someone being either very unlucky or very disloyal, hung in the air like a death sentence. Sterling's request that I watch for suspicious behavior, asking me to investigate the informant who was myself while providing intelligence about the federal investigation targeting him, created an impossible balancing act between criminal cooperation and federal investigation. Agent Redrock's response that they needed to be more careful about preventing crimes, that too much intervention would expose my cover, meant allowing some criminal activity to proceed to maintain investigation integrity. The moral calculus was disturbing but necessary. Priority went to preventing violent crimes, major fraud, and activities seriously harming innocent people. Lesser financial crimes might be allowed to proceed if stopping them would compromise the investigation. 6 months of this double life took its toll. The federal courthouse trial now showcases 43 defendants including Marcus Redstone, Sterling Arch, and everyone I once considered colleagues, sitting in orange jumpsuits while prosecutors detail their crimes using overwhelming evidence. Recorded conversations, financial records, victim testimony, and comprehensive intelligence gathered through my 18 months of undercover work. The federal courthouse in Salt Lake City buzzes with controlled chaos of a major organized crime trial. 43 defendants, including Marcus Redstone, Sterling Arch, and everyone I once thought of as colleagues, sit in orange jumpsuits listening to prosecutors detail their crimes. The evidence is overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial records, victim testimony, and comprehensive intelligence gathered through my 18 months of undercover work. I sit in the witness protection section, my appearance altered by cosmetic surgery and identity protected by federal marshals. The man who was Jake Sanderson no longer exists, replaced by someone whose name and history have been carefully constructed by government professionals. The trial will last another month, but convictions are already certain. Defense attorneys negotiate plea bargains rather than mounting serious challenges to evidence. Sterling's organization will be dismantled completely, its assets seized, its members imprisoned for decades. But justice, I've learned, is more complex than law enforcement victories. Mesa Canyon received 15 years for money laundering, despite being coerced into criminal activity through threats against her family. River McKenzie was found dead in her apartment 3 days before scheduled testimony. An apparent suicide everyone knows was murder. Aspen Moab disappeared entirely after being released on bail, probably killed by the organization she had served faithfully for years. The criminals have been defeated, but the human cost has been staggering. I think often about the pattern that started everything. Those identical meals Marcus Redstone shared with me in the company cafeteria. The precision of that psychological manipulation still amazes me. They studied my routines, identified my vulnerabilities, and constructed elaborate fiction designed to make me feel special and important, while recruiting me into their conspiracy. The shared meals weren't coincidence or recognition. They were bait, carefully designed to appeal to my desire for connection and meaning. Perhaps the most disturbing realization is how much I enjoyed the work, even after learning its true nature. The intellectual challenge of gathering intelligence, the adrenaline of dangerous meetings, the sense of purpose that came from believing I was serving a larger cause. These feelings persisted even when I understood I was risking my life daily. The mundane routine of processing insurance claims feels impossibly distant from the person I became during those months of deception and counterdeception. I learned skills I never imagined possessing, discovered psychological strengths and weaknesses I hadn't known existed, and survived experiences that fundamentally changed my understanding of human nature. Now I live in a small town in Oregon under a name that isn't mine, working a job providing comfortable anonymity while I wait for appeals to conclude and final threats to my safety to diminish. The FBI provides monthly check-ins and security assessments, but essentially, I'm alone with knowledge of what I've seen and done. Sometimes I wonder about alternative timelines. What if I had brought simple sandwiches instead of elaborate meals from Sage's kitchen? What if I had ignored coworker attention instead of seeking approval through culinary deception? What if I had recognized the recruitment attempt before becoming deeply involved in criminal activity? But these questions assume my choices were entirely my own, and I've learned that individual agency is often an illusion. The criminal organization identified me, studied me, and manipulated me with such sophistication that my apparent choices were actually responses to carefully engineered stimuli. The most sobering lesson is how easy it is to lose track of your own identity when skilled professionals work to reshape your reality. The psychological techniques used by Sterling's organization were so subtle and comprehensive that I genuinely believed I was serving law enforcement while actually serving criminals. The line between victim and perpetrator became meaningless when everyone was simultaneously both.